Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Vantage Point. We're coming to you on the final day of the 5th ANC National Policy Conference from Nasrec in Soweto. In the first part of the show, we're going to bring you one of the most important commissions that was discussed in the conference, and that was on economic policy. And we're going to go now to the economic policy briefing by Enoch Gondongwana.
The key question we should take into account in dealing with these issues, we're dealing with recommendation to the National Conference. The first one is the land issue. The first one is the land issue. I think the general consensus on quick measures to restore land to our people. General consensus on that. We also talked about measures to give effect to that. In particular, one of the things we need to do is to speed up the Expropriation Act in order to be able to give effect to expropriation. There are two approaches then to that question. The first approach, as you might have known, is the one that says the quickest way to that route is the expropriation without compensation. A different view that says, no, the current provisions in the Constitution are sufficient enough, provided we can speed up the Expropriation Act to give effect to expropriation without necessarily amending the Constitution. These are the proposals which are being taken to our branches for a discussion in December. But in between, a process as we did with the debate on nationalization, we've agreed that to continue with a research process which will make sure that we take informed decision on these matters. Take informed decision. A third element is that we've got to speed up also the implementation. Even on the land that we have at the moment, there's been insufficient support measures. And that is a critical factor. Added to that is that in 1992, in our Ready to Govern document, we prioritize specific land types for expropriation. In this regard, we're going back to identify land for speculation, absentee landlords, and so on, for expropriation. We'll do an audit of that, including government land. For instance, on the agricultural side, it is alleged that there's 4 million hectares which are government owned. That combined effect, in the meantime, will be continue to move with speed in land redistribution and restitution. State-owned enterprise, the issue that dominates the discussion is the issue of good governance and corruption. Matters that need to be attended as a matter of urgency. On the Reserve Bank, let me give you some discussion. This discussion is not new. The discussion started while Jill Marcus was the governor. Interesting, it didn't come from the ANC at the time. It came from unions such as NUMSA and so on the fact that this is an anomaly that an institution such as the Reserve Bank should be in public hands. The proposal agrees that the independence of the Reserve Bank should be guaranteed in terms of the Constitution. In fact, the resolution takes directly from the Constitution that quotation that it should be guaranteed. But there's general agreement that the anomaly of a reserve bank that is still in private hands is a problem. It's an anomaly. And I must give you this and say, since its formation in 1921, most banks, central banks, were in private hands. But generally, there's been a trend, a movement away from that across the board, particularly that started in the 1930s. And South Africa has not followed that trend. It's still sticking to the framework of the 1920s. That's on the Reserve Bank. On the financial sector, generally, there's the role of the DFRs and what has people been calling for the State Bank. Generally, there's no major discussion there because in any event, some months ago, before we come to conference, I think at the beginning of the year, we've been exploring this notion, and there's a committee headed by the TG working in this regard. A key element is also the issue of concentration in the economy. That issue, we've got to speed up radical economic transformation and change the concentration. A critical area which is the issue of financing development and the role of the financial sector in this regard. A proposal is being put forward to explore the potential, the possibility of what is called this thing, prescribed assets. Black economic empowerment centers on two aspects in particular. The first one is to ensure that while we are supporting centralized procurement, there must be broader representation of the other departments in that sector. Secondly, the legislative framework has got to be changed to take into account developments in procurement, with a specific reference that we've got to make sure that the targets for empowerment are increased in the procurement sector. Manufacturing. Clearly, we've been making decisions in this matter. When I looked at the figures by state SA, starting from 2013 to 2017 quarter, there are 17 quarters of that manufacturing has actually performed well in 5 of those 17 quarters, 12 of which were negative. And clearly, if we want to make an impact on employment, a special focus to manufacturing has got to take place. Skills. To summarize the effect, if you look at the unemployment figures, the majority of them are young people. Our attention is to go focus on what is called NEETs, not in education, not in employment, and not in training. A massive program for vocational training in that regard. We will be developing a program. In that program, we'll invite the private sector to work with us. And we will approach to Minister next to me and discuss these issues in NEDLAC. We want also to improve the efficiency of the public infrastructure spending. What do I mean by that? Is that there are too much leakages, in the sense that there's too much of an import component in that regard, and therefore we're not making an impact on employment. We can talk about trillions and trillions unless we make sure that those trillions are consumed in South Africa. There will be no impact on employment. We want to improve the efficiency of that. There's beneficiation, which is a normal term, and sometimes I get problematic because since 1992 we've been talking about beneficiation, but little impact. And in this regard, the proposal to make sure that that is in fact achieved. On the mining side, there will probably be a couple of issues. But let me sing out the what you want to hear about is the mining charter. Let me take you a step back. We've never had disagreements about the targets. We've never have much disagreement about the beneficiaries. What is being contested is the design in the form of whether a free carry should be available for whether it should be a state or available to free individuals. That's a contested terrain. On the taxation side, reaffirm the decision we took in the NGC to explore the possibility of a wealth tax. The possibility of a wealth tax. And secondly, among other things, two other taxes which the Commission expressed a little bit of a worry that we need to do some work and look at the employment effects. On the sugar tax one, people are saying, okay, one of the things it's got health effects, obesity, employment, balance those things. There's already some study which is being done by NEDLAC. We await that. Our view is that pending that study and the finalization of that program, and NEDLAC, we should not proceed. The monitoring and evaluation. A key element which every day was pressed by a lot of delegates is that we come into conferences and make decisions, but lately in implementation. In this regard, agreement is that we've got to make sure that we strictly hold our deployees accountable and develop systems of making them accountable. There were other operational issues that were raised. I don't want to go into detail into that. Let me just say one issue. Having said what I said about the mining charter, is that broadly the objectives of the charter are not contested. We're all agreed in that regard. As I've said, is that the design and is the issue is the design.
Okay, that was really interesting thoughts put to us by Committee Chairperson of the Economic Policy Committee, Ina Gondongwana. We're going to take a short break now, and after the break we'll bring you some analysis from some of the commissions, as well as bringing you some of the footage of President Zuma's farewell speech. Welcome back. We're now going to look at some highlights from President Jacob Zuma's speech. I've got the speech in front of me. It's quite a long speech, but we're going to break it down into maybe 10 or 12 minutes with just some of the highlights of the speech. And one of the most important things the President spoke about during the speech was the need for unity in the organization. Most of the policies that were discussed during this policy conference will now be taken back to the branches of the ANC and will be put to the main conference in December, where they will be voted on. So let's take a look now at President Jacob Zuma's speech, his highlights of that speech today.
Comrades, let me take this opportunity first and foremost to thank all delegates who came from the length and breadth of our country to attend this historic 5th ANC National Policy Conference. You distinguished yourselves in our observation more than any other time. quality of the discussion was very high. I can tell you, particularly when we listen to the youth, the young membership that is here, with vibrant debate, we felt at our age, because we are no longer young, that this ANC is going to remain in good hands. Your presence here has ensured that we together were part of shaping, sharpening, and deepening the policies of the ANC. But there is one point that has been proved, which I've been arguing for, and getting defeated all the time in the argument. That less than a week for the ANC conference is too short. As a result, this time, because it was 1 week, only today, because we had to deal with matters in a particular way, delegates had enough time to express their views without a rule, 2 minutes. 2 minutes because it's cut. 1 week is good, not so. Shouldn't we make it a custom? As you. So that we can discuss issues and compete. I'm sure the NSC will agree. We also thank all alliance partners and the leads of the ANC, as well as all progressive democratic formations who graced this conference with their presence. We express our sincere gratitude also to the stalwarts and veterans of our movement who attended this policy conference and participated in discussions from day one, despite the demands associated with their advanced age. Your presence reaffirms the fact that the ANC is still a people's movement, a broad church, and a true parliament of the people. You debated the matters that our people are eager about, not in secret but in public. You briefed the nation through the media. Compatriots, I'm proud to report that this conference discussed all important issues facing the ANC and the country in a disciplined manner, befitting the stature of our movement as a leader of society. Everyone agrees that this policy conference has been a watershed in the arena of the Festival of Ideas. Different ideas were articulated and debated. Various formulations were presented and tested so that the movement can come out of this conference with a common perspective on all issues that were being deliberated upon. All delegates and participants were demonstrated, all delegates and participants here demonstrated deep understanding that the ANC plays a central role in the betterment of the lives of our people, and that the ANC still remains the strategic center of power. Comrades, we have come to the end of our 5th ANC National Policy Conference, which was both vibrant and robust in its deliberations. We can confidently declare that this was a very fruitful and successful policy conference. Comrades, it is not the intention of this address to go into a detailed account of outcomes of commissions. A full conference report will be sent to structures and also publicized. We say it was successful because the main objectives of the policy conference were achieved. We came here first and foremost to review the policies of the ANC and to assess whether we are still on course with the execution of the goals of the National Democratic Revolution. We came here to assess the work done since the last conference and also to make policy proposals where necessary to the upcoming 54th National Conference. All these tasks were done remarkably well by the delegates. We emerged out of this policy conference much wiser and better in our understanding of both our strengths and weaknesses. We have a keen understanding of our challenges and how to overcome them.
We're going to take a short break now. Stay tuned, and when we come back, we're going to bring you some analysis from some of the commissions that were discussed over the last 5 days. To give us some more analysis, I'm delighted to be joined now by ENCA senior researcher Angelo Fick. Angelo, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to ITV.
Assalam. Thank you so much for having me.
Angelo, we see some of the commissions have already given their report backs. Something that came across last night, and it's been the word that's been going around this morning, white monopoly capital versus monopoly capital. Just with the removal of one word, does it really show the divisions in the party?
Yes, because what the issue of race in relation to capitalism in South Africa is not a new question for the African National Congress. This is a debate that's been with the party since the 1960s. How to discuss the economy in relation to the apartheid state, and we've heard repeatedly here that the party says the relationship for it is one of cooperation as well as contestation, working together on what they agree with capitalists about and contesting what they don't agree with capitalists about, which is a very different kind of position, for example, from the mass democratic movement in the United Democratic Front in the 80s, where it was clearly stated that the problem is really about capitalism. How the SACP and COSATU will respond to this cooperate and contest relationship, we'll hear next week from the SACP and presumably over the next few days from the COSATU as an alliance partner in relation to working people and poor people's interests. But the deletion of the word white monopoly or white from white monopoly capital, I think indicates that that faction of the ANC which pushed for this to be the focus of the ANC NPC has not quite got the strong, shall we say, backing through these discussions that they may have wished for. Because the fact that this is still ongoing, this discussion about whether or not it's monopoly capital, or white monopoly capital, indicates that the divisions in the party are not just sectoral or factional, that there actually is a deep-seated ideological problem which, because of these factions, the party seems unable to fully address.
Now, we focusing on words and issues like that. Do you think the ANC should rather be focusing on nut and bolt policies that could be implemented and that would actually help alleviate poverty in this country?
Well, I think the party will say that there is a link between those two things. The question for many South Africans remains, how it is that you can have policy that doesn't match praxis. So how is it that you have a policy that's progressive, but you have implementation as a problem? And this is something that the ANC president raised in his particular statement at the opening of the conference. The Secretary General raised this in his organizational diagnostic report, that many people perceive the party to have progressive policies, but the implementation is the problem. Now, for a party that has had 23 years of control in government, it really is a bit late to be working out mechanisms, many observers would argue, that you've had 23 years to put these mechanisms in place. And yes, all sorts of conservative and regressive forces, both domestic and international, are actually geared against you and your project. But what is your internal record? Because again, the ANC says there's subjective reasons for its failures to deliver in all sorts of ways, and then deflects from that by talking about these international array of forces, that South Africa has enemies. And I think this inconsistency is not just an internal inconsistency, it speaks to the really sort of serious battles over control between the party's different factions, which I think speak to the kind of succession we're going to have at its leadership and elective conference in December of 2017.
Okay, just for the benefit of our viewers out there, now we've got these commissions and the chairpeople of the commissions are addressing the media. What happens now?
Well, now presumably all these documents will have to be written up, so the discussions will have to be captured, an unfortunate word, they'll have to be kind of put into documents that go back to the branches for discussion and deliberations ahead of the elective conference in December. And many will argue that it is the feedback loop that we're seeing here that should shift for the ANC where its position will be in December of 2017. Because once they go to the elective conference and decisions are ratified and then pushed out as policy, the ANC government, whoever that will be in 2018, will have to implement those policies. Now, some of this all hinges on what it is that happens in December of the leadership succession race, because it's one thing to have a set of policies and it's another to have the political will to actually implement them. And I think many people, given the 2016 local government election outcomes, have begun to judge the ANC not on the promises they make or the words they use, but on the actions and the life they see around them. And so the ANC is running a very, very tight schedule at the moment, because 2019 looms and it cannot suffer, in its own estimation, the defeats that it has suffered in the major metropolitan areas, that it cannot have that at either national or provincial level, because that would put the ANC in opposition where it has traditionally not done well at all. In fact, the Western Cape is an example of an ANC caucus that is not as good as it could be, precisely because it's one thing to have yourself in power with majority and you can ignore what they say is the opposition. It's another thing to be the opposition and not be able to strategize on your role in government, because failure to deliver as government is very different from in opposition having to work in ways that people can then trust you to put you in touch with power come the next election. And in opposition in South Africa, we know it's tough because people often have very stark choices. And so the ANC's having to work on its organizational mandate, not just for being in power, but as Feby Potgieter said yesterday, also working in relation to how it would behave in opposition.
Do you think the ANC realize that 2019 could be a make or break year for them? And do they realize that they could be in big trouble come 2019 should certain policies be not implemented properly?
I think there is a realization that they're in deep trouble. I'm not certain that there is a realization that the solutions must be made or must be implemented sooner rather than later, that they actually do not have 2 years left, because implementation of policy takes a long time to become effective, because we know that if you simply tar my road the week before an election, I'm not saying this actually happened, this doesn't necessarily change my behavior at the ballot box. And so people, I think, in the wake of the 2016 local government election results in Johannesburg, Tshwane and Nelson Mandela Bay, the ANC needs to take deep stock that these are not just large metropoles, that they are symbolic metropoles, because it is the administrative capital of South Africa, it is the economic heartland of the country. And if you are seen not to be able to govern these by a significant portion of the voting population, you now give new parties the chance to prove that they can. And also you have to behave in opposition so that should people think those parties are not able to do it, they at least trust you to get a second attempt at running those spaces. And the ANC has that challenge ahead of it, which is to deliver fast, deliver effectively, and still not to be seen to be partisan in doing so, because again, voters are not just voting fodder. They don't just behave irrationally by way of loyalty. They can see a party that's cynically playing a game in order to simply get back into power versus a party that takes its role in opposition seriously and is still committed to delivering services, delivering all of the benefits of a post-apartheid freedom, even if it is in opposition, not in power.
And finally, talk has come out that they're looking to get rid of the slate voting and vote directly. Is this a way of maybe appeasing one of the factions come December this year?
I think it's one of the mechanisms that they may think will resolve some of the corruption and rot we see inside the branches that they've themselves spoken to and spoken of. And it's not new. They've spoken of this at their NGC in 2015, in October of that year. But whether this will work or not is a different story, because the vetting process of how you come to be a member in good standing may become the focus of people who want to hijack the process. So the logistical challenges remain for the party. And beyond the logistical challenges are, of course, the moral and ethical challenges which South Africans have laid down for the party to meet. South Africans in their numbers have spoken not just at the elections, but actually directly to the party in the research they did about the trust deficit, the image deficit, and the fact that the party no longer holds the position that it did for 80 odd years in South Africa as the moral centre and the political centre in which justice, equality and freedom was going to be achieved. Now, after 23 years of being in power, it is that challenge that the party, I think, has to rise to if it has any ambition to remain politically relevant beyond 2019, because the stakes cannot just be 2019. Because if the stakes were just 2019, that is, shall we say, a staying mechanism, because the party's goals are 2030, which means it has 2 more elections after 2019 to ensure that it actually does effect social change progressively for the majority of South Africans.
Do you think the Integrity Commission, with noises coming out that they've asked the President to step down, do you think after this conference they'll be stronger, or will they still just be a sitting duck who can't really do much?
If the Integrity Commission is not strengthened, the ANC runs the risk of being seen to be all talk about reining in corruption and disciplining people who are behaving badly. Makosi Khoza indicated that the administration of justice and punishment inside the ANC is not consistent, and has indicated that the threats of punishment of MPs who wish to vote with their conscience as opposed to vote along party instruction lines and thereby take their constitutional duty and their oath of office seriously over the party loyalty. If that is not consistently meted out, the ANC will continue to be seen by people as protecting the interests of a few inside the party over the larger interests of the organisation. Now, this is something that the organisation has pushed through repeatedly, and it's been there for at least 50 years. This argument that organisation is bigger than personality. And the question for the ANC is, to which extent will they succumb to personality cult of whatever kind? Will they rally behind a leader as a personality, or will they rally behind a party and a movement, as they keep telling us, that needs renewal, resuscitation and a revisitation of its old values in order to ensure its survival and its dedication to the project that it, after all, began? Much of the post-apartheid architecture around freedom, constitutionalism, democracy is the architecture brought by ANC negotiators at the CODESA tables. If this is going to be the space at which we abandon that, the party will have, I think, a very difficult time to recover from that into 2020s and 2030s.
Angelo, thank you so much for your time. I think it's really interesting points put through, and it's now a case of just wait and see. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Really interesting points put through there by ANC senior researcher Angelo Fick. And as I said, it's just going to be a case of now let's just wait and see what happens in the next 6 months. Okay, with more analysis now coming from the ANC National Policy Conference, I'm delighted to be joined by Sunday Times political reporter Kanita Hunter. Kanita, assalamu alaikum, welcome to ITV.
Wa alaikum salam, jazakallah so much for having me.
Kanita, we've seen some of the commissions have already come out and given press conferences, but the biggest issue that's coming out is white monopoly capital versus monopoly capital. There's rumors of fights happening inside. What's your take on that?
I think that this has been the proxy fight that has come out of this National Policy Conference of the ANC. There's always proxy fights in these particular conferences, in what is known as a battle of forces as to who is currently or what sentiment is winning in the ANC as per this moment. So the fight about white monopoly capital, we know that last night there was an announcement by Joel Nechutenze, who's the ANC's greatest minds, one of their greatest minds, who came out and said commissions have agreed that there's no such thing as white monopoly capital. And the reason why that's so important, because this has been a narrative sort of driven by so-called Gupta apologists, where they said that you can't be worrying about the Gupta family and their alleged corruption, but you need to be focusing on the so-called economic issues and wrongs that is being committed by this grouping called white monopoly capital. Now, in the commissions there was a lot of fight about this, because it was a proxy fight between supporters of Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, who believe there's no such thing as white monopoly capital, meaning that we should not have a racial sort of tag to it. There's only a problem of monopoly capital. But those supporting Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma have said that you have to racialize it, and you have to say that in South Africa, those who own the monopolies in the economy are white people. So that's the fight that's been happening, and it will continue, I think, for a little part of this morning, and we'll see the finality of that debate when we hear the outcomes of the conference and when President Jacob Zuma addresses the closing of this conference. But it's not particularly about the lexicon as it is about the proxy fights that happen between the two factions in the ANC.
But do you think debating a word, white, is going to solve any of the problems that the ANC genuinely have? I mean, we are living in a country with economic disparity. We have so many of the black majority in poverty. Do you think debating words instead of really debating real policies is going to really help the ANC going forward?
I think policy conferences is known to have these sort of ideological debates on lexicon. We know that in 2012 there was a whole drama about nationalization and non-nationalization, and so it really becomes taglines, it really becomes campaign slogans of the different competing factions towards the ANC's December elective conference. You're absolutely right when you say that this is not something the ANC should be affording so much of time to, and that the real issue is how are we going to get the country out of recession, and how are you going to sort of get the ratings agencies to upgrade your sovereign rating from junk status to a better rating. So I think that you are right, that it's absolutely the most important issue of conference should be how to solve the economy. But generally these conferences are not really about coming up with real new revolutionary ideas, as it is to have personal proxy fights.
Okay, now moving forward, we know December this year we're going to have the elective conference. Whatever's happening here, do we see any clear leader coming out from the two factions? It's basically Cyril versus Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Are we seeing any clear-cut winners coming out from this conference?
I think that you're seeing some indication and some shift of what the opinions like. It's not always sort of easy to predict who's going to be the leader from a policy conference, but you would obviously see that the tide in favor of Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and that particular faction of President Jacob Zuma is sort of on the downward trajectory, because had they been the dominant faction, there wouldn't be so much of a fight, because then dissent would have been squashed, as we've seen in other conferences, like for example in the last National General Council in 2015, where dissent was squashed immediately. So it's quite difficult to predict right now, but once President Jacob Zuma closes this conference, it would then be a lot easier to say which grouping has sort of the more dominant support among ordinary members and delegates of the ANC. But I do think that this conference cannot be looked at in isolation. It has to be considered through the prism of the elective conference. That is, who is likely to have that support, and we'll know that for sure once plenary has finalized all the decisions.
Okay, as we're speaking now, one of the main commissions, the ones that's going to be dealing with economic transformation, has not finished yet. Do you, from your sources, do you think there's major fights happening in there, or is it just so many topics to discuss and the debate could be so robust?
I think that it's become a very personalized debate, and if you've seen our reporting, that even in the commissions themselves, there were very personalized, very brutal attacks against individuals and not against their ideas. For example, Derek Hanekom, the former Minister of Tourism, was attacked because he spoke out against the issue of land. Pravin Gordhan, the former Finance Minister, was attacked because he defended, or rather said there was no such thing as white monopoly capital, and he was then accused of being a defender of white monopoly capital. And so was the situation in another commission on the economy with Jeremy Cronin, a white leader of the South African Communist Party, where there was also attempts to silence him. So there's been a very, very personalized debate that has come up instead of it being an issue-driven debate. And so in the plenary today, that's continuation of the commissions, where Joel Nchutenze, like I said, one of the ANC's greatest minds on policy and discussion and thought, being attacked personally and being asked to apologize for saying there's no such thing as white monopoly capital. So who would win the day? We are yet to see.
Okay, and finally, we're standing in front of the so-called fence that says basically divided journalists from the rest of the media. As a seasoned journalist, how has this affected your reporting, and has it ever happened at previous ANC conferences where delegates were barred from speaking to the media?
I think that the ANC has learned a very important lesson, if you want to talk from their side firstly, that as long as there's interaction with journalists and delegates, there will be some sort of leaks and that kind of thing. We've obviously seen that this fence has not been effective because the leaks have still come out. But I do think that it is a broader sentiment of what the ANC's attitude towards media freedom, despite them saying that they are supportive of media freedom and the freedom of expression, because this type of wall is sort of, someone joked that it has North Korea tendencies. And I do think that while they have security concerns, I do think that it is a limitation to the freedom of expression and the freedom of the press.
And I said it was finally, but I've got one more question for you. Do you think the ANC realize that they are in trouble and there is a chance of 2019 falling away from them? Or is it just the media overhyping the situation they're in?
I do think that the ANC has come out of this conference, or will come out of this conference, realizing the real challenges it faced. We saw the almost frank and honest concessions made by the ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe in his report. But the truth is that the ANC is known for properly diagnosing its problems. It is, however, not known for coming up with the adequate solutions. And that's the problem of this conference, that we're failing to hear what are you going to do about the problems that you're facing, because everyone is in tandem over what problems you are facing.
Thank you so much for your time. I think it's really important points and really interesting thoughts for our viewers out there. That was Kanita Hunter from the Sunday Times, just giving us some more analysis. And as we said today, we're going to bring you more analysis from the conference as it enters its final day. We've come to the end of today's broadcast. Thank you for joining us. It is also the end of the series, a special series brought to you from the ANC National Policy Conference here in Soweto. What we've seen here are really important topics that were discussed by the ANC, NPC, discussing the policies that will be debated in the December main conference, which will probably be taking place in Gauteng as well. So what's going to be very interesting going forward now is the ANC. They're going to take all these policies back to their branches all over the country, and let's see what of these policies will be accepted and which of these policies will be rejected by the NPC and by the branch members. Because remember, the branch members are the people on the ground who make all the decisions, and at the end of the day, the power lies in their hands. So from me, Mohammed Chunara, and the rest of the team here, Pervez Khan and Ellen Shuma, I thank you for joining us, and we hope you have enjoyed this broadcast we've brought to you on ITV. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.